Welcome. We're going to look at animal cells this morning, and I'm here with Elvis, and we're going to talk about the structure of animal cells and then compare them to plant cells a bit later. So, what can we see here on the screen, Elvis?
You can see a big cell with an orange ball in it, and you also can see some purple balls with blue balls in the middle. But
Okay.
that wouldn't tell anyone anything. So, what is an animal cell?
It's a good question. A cell is the very, very basic unit of life. We, as a human being, are made up of about 100 trillion animal cells, looking, in fact, very similar to that one with the orange blob in the middle. But I know that you know what that orange blob is. So what is that, Elvis, that orange blob?
It's a nucleus.
Excellent. So do you want to label the nucleus? And what does a nucleus do in a cell?
It controls the cell, basically.
Excellent. Do you know what it has in it?
DNA.
Excellent. Good. And DNA is the molecule in biology that gives the recipe for every organism. So the DNA in all of us is slightly different because we're all slightly different. What's on the surface of the cell there, Elvis?
The blue round object, is a cell membrane.
Excellent. And brilliant. And what does the cell membrane do? Do you know?
It controls what substance goes in and out of the cells.
That's absolutely brilliant. It's a bit like a bouncer on a door of a nightclub, who's controlling who's going in and out.
Yeah.
And do you know why this is so important for the cell?
Because what happens if you had if you had a substance that was too large to not fit in the cell, and it maybe would burst it.
Right, excellent. If you've got control of what goes in and out, then you can live for a longer time, can't you? Imagine if you didn't have any control what you ate. Imagine if somebody just kept on putting stuff down your throat. What happens if they gave you poison? You die. But if you can say, I'm not going to eat that, thank you, then you are able to live for longer because you can control what's inside your cell. Really important. That was such an important part of evolution a couple of billion years ago when cells got membranes so they could control their own, what we call internal environment. Big phrase there. Okay. Now, we can't really see anything between the nucleus and the cell membrane, but what do we know is there?
A cytoplasm.
Excellent.
Which is where chemical reactions happen inside the cell.
Absolutely. Although this looks really basic, we've got the nucleus there and then we've got the cell membrane. In fact, that cell is like a city. It's got loads of things going on in it. There's loads of proteins being made, there's loads of chemical reactions, there's respiration, which...
Mitochondria.
Exactly. And so, in fact, if we were going to draw a mitochondria, do you know, where would we draw a mitochondria, do you think?
Inside.
Yeah? Do you want to draw one then? Excellent. Brilliant. I love the fact you've done more than one as well, because there's actually thousands of mitochondria all doing what process?
Respiration.
And what's the equation for respiration?
Well, it is oxygen plus
Okay,
glucose.
now, do you know this is one of the most common equations are? So, absolutely. So, we've got oxygen
Yes.
and glucose.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Which forms to make
Yeah.
carbon dioxide, water, and energy. And carbon dioxide and water are the waste products of respiration, but energy isn't.
That's brilliant. And so, which is the important one there that we've made?
Energy.
Excellent. What do we use the energy for?
Our muscles.
Brilliant. Everything we do, in fact. If anything happens in life, it requires energy to happen. So we've got the nucleus, we've got the cytoplasm, we've got the cell membrane, and we've got the mitochondria. That's an individual cell. But I talked earlier, do you remember how many cells I said there was in our body, perhaps? Do you remember how many together?
Trillion.
Trillions, 100 trillion, perhaps. Okay. And we can see in the second photo here that, in fact, rather than having just one cell on its own, which is focused in on the top diagram, we've in fact got cells all together. In fact,
All do the same thing.
Well, they do if they're in a what?
Tissue.
Good. A tissue is a group of similar cells that come together, okay, to form a certain tissue. And so a tissue will only be similar cells. So would you say that was a tissue? Probably, obviously, some of them.
Yes.
Yes, because look, they're all pretty identical, aren't they?
Yes.
Okay. What happens if we have different tissues coming together to perform a function? What do we call that?
Organ.
That's right. So tissues can come together. So an example of, say, a tissue might be muscle tissue, because all of the muscle cells come together, they're all similar, and they work as a muscle, which is a tissue. But can you give me an example of where muscle might be with nerves and fat and pump?
Heart.
The heart, good boy. The heart is an organ, and it's not just muscle. It's muscle, nerves, it's got fat around it, and blood, good, excellent, and blood vessels. And together, they all are a number of different tissues which form an organ which has a function, which is to pump blood around the body. So that's our animal cell. And we can look on the right hand side here and we can see a diagram of a plant cell. Now, there's 3 things you need to know about a plant cell that are different from an animal cell. Can you tell me the first one, Elvis?
The first one is a cell wall.
Excellent.
Which keeps the cell's structure
Good.
and shape. The second one is chloroplasts, which have chlorophyll inside, which are used to photosynthesize, which is how plants get their food. This third one is vacuole, which is the sap inside next to the cytoplasm.
That's brilliant. Excellent. So those are the 3. Cell wall. Now, I really like the way you talked about the cell shape there, because the cell, if you look at that animal cell on the left hand side, we can see that the shape is a bit higgledy-piggledy, isn't it? There's no real definite shape. Some bits bulge out a bit, some bits bulge in.
Bumpy and stuff.
That's right, it's all bumpy. And that's because the cell membrane alone, the cell membrane is actually quite fluid. If you, in fact, were to look at a cell properly, the cell membrane's a bit like olive oil, actually. It's really fluidy. And so it doesn't offer any real rigidity. There's no rigid shape. The cell wall, however, is made of something called, do you know what it's called?
Cellulose.
Excellent. It's made of cellulose. And cellulose is like rope. It's really strong. And you know it's so strong because if ever you've tried to eat...
Is it made out of starch?
It is, yep, good. It's made of with glucose units together. Yeah. And you know when you eat celery, it's really stringy and difficult to chew? Well, that's cellulose because it's such a strong substance. And plants have the cell wall, which is this really strong outer layer, and this gives the cell strength and a rigid shape. Okay, brilliant. You also mentioned next the chloroplasts, and you used a brilliant terminology that it's where photosynthesis takes place, and the fact that it's plants making their food. What is the equation for photosynthesis?
Well, it is respiration backwards.
Excellent.
The equation, to be honest. So it's sunlight plus water plus carbon dioxide forms to make oxygen, which we breathe in, and glucose, which is our food.
Excellent. That's really good, Elvis. One thing to say is that plants produce oxygen as a waste product, like we produce carbon dioxide, a bit like car exhaust.
So we give them the carbon dioxide when we breathe out. They give us our oxygen when we breathe in.
That's absolutely right. But one thing I want to be clear about here is that there's no arrangement here with plants and animals. Yeah. This is just complete luck. Plants, we don't grow plants, for example, to get oxygen. They happen to give oxygen, and we happen to breathe it in.
Lucky for us.
And that's why they are really lucky for us. Okay, there was a time before plants where there was no oxygen on the earth, and plants photosynthesized for millions and millions and millions of years and increased the oxygen consumption or production, and so animals could actually start becoming alive on the earth. Brilliant. So that's where, now the chloroplasts are green. Why are they green, Elvis?
Because they hold chlorophyll.
Excellent. And chlorophyll is the chemical, or what we call a pigment, that does photosynthesis. Because you know, don't you, that if you were to get some water and you were to spray it through the air from a hose pipe, you know that that water is hitting carbon dioxide in the air And it might happen in the garden in the sunshine in the summer, but it doesn't turn into glucose, does it?
No.
So it's not a case of if you just add water and carbon dioxide in the sun, you're going to suddenly get glucose. Plants have special chloroplasts with chlorophyll in, and it's the chlorophyll and what are called enzymes in the plant which are able to take the carbon dioxide and the water with the sunlight and mix it up and turn it into glucose. It's an amazing, amazing process. And the last thing you said was the vacuole. Now I'm actually going to say something here which is a bit of more of an extension. It's that they have a permanent vacuole. There's always a vacuole in a plant.
Stores food.
It stores a cell sap, that's right. And it's very important because, and we're going to finish off with this on the differences, because two of these differences we've said are really important for a plant in a way that animals don't have to worry about. And that's this. You and I, how do we beat gravity? How do we get our heads off the ground to beat gravity? It's a difficult question, but what do we use? How come your head is kept off the ground?
Well, gravity.
Well, gravity pulls it down,
Yeah.
but what holds it up in your body?
Spine.
Good. And so we call that the whole thing is your...
Body.
Yep. And the bones are called your...
Bones.
What do you, if you were in a doctor's surgery and you saw a model of a...
Skeleton.
Good. It's your skeleton.
Yeah.
And what moves the skeleton?
Muscles.
Excellent. We've got muscles and a skeleton to hold ourselves up. Why do we, with our two eyes, want to be, say, off the ground? Can you think back in evolution? What would the advantage have been to being able to stand up and get off the ground?
Running.
Running, okay. Anything else? What can you do that if you're on the ground?
Further.
Perfect. Can you see that with two eyes at the front of our head as well? If we can stand up at about, say, 5 to 6.5 feet, which is probably what humans usually are, then we can see over grass, we can see predators, we can see prey, and we can see into the distance. Okay? So, us standing up requires muscles and a skeleton. How many bones has a plant got in it?
None.
None. How many muscles has a plant got in it?
None.
Hang on. Are you telling me, therefore, that without bones and without muscle, a plant is able to hold its leaves off the ground?
That's what a stem's for.
Good. That's exactly what a stem's for. And do you know how they do that?
No.
It's really amazing. All they use is water.
Wow.
And water is a substance where if these plant cells all bulge full of water, then they can hold the stem up. It makes it nice and firm. A bit like a balloon. If you filled a balloon with water, yeah, and it was really bulging, you could actually balance something on top of it, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so imagine each of the plant cells in the stem being like a full balloon of water, and they can build up on top of each other, and because they're what we call turgid, which is full of water and really plump, then the cells will be able to hold cells on top of each other. And the cell wall and the vacuole are really important in that, because if the cell wall wasn't so strong, then it wouldn't be able to hold the weight of the rest of the plant. Okay, and the vacuole is important because it pushes out on the cell wall to make the cells nice and plump. You couldn't build a tower full of balloons that were just had a bit of water in. You need to build a tower with really plump balloons, and that's what the plant does, using water instead of a skeleton and muscles. And so there we have a summary of the animal cells and the plant cells. Really excellent stuff, Elvis. We haven't in any way rehearsed this, and so your knowledge there and the way you talked about the cells is really excellent. So well done. And if you want to think about these things further, the next thing to think about is what these organelles do and finding out more detail about how the cell works in its everyday workings.